You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Lived on an island in Greece? Check. Moving to Malta and Cyprus? Check. Toured with Cirque du Soleil for a decade? Check. 4 passports, French father, New Zealand mother, grew up in Australia? Check, 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 check. What a guest for CX Passport today as I get a chance to talk with Carolene Méli, the owner and liver of all of those experiences. Carolene led over 50 experience teams in 17 different countries and continues today helping individuals, brands, and companies redefine how they create experiences. A fellow podcaster, Carolene leads a discussion on how great experiences can beautifully impact our lives in the Experience Creators podcast. So listeners, hit pause, go search up the Experience Creators, subscribe, then come on back to this CX Passport episode with Carolene. With all that in her past and present, you can see how Carolene became the experience strategist that she is today. Carolene had this host fascinated at lived on an island in Greece, and then it just kept building. I am so eager to hear how all of those have shaped her approach to experience and travel. Carolene, welcome to CX Passport.
Thank you so much. I feel like that intro summed up everything beautifully. Do we even need to continue the episode? Or
all right, everybody, enjoy the episode. Subscribe, download, leave a review. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Carolene. No, of course not. There's so much more that you have to say. I know we are definitely going to get to that Cirque experience, but first, there's a quote of yours that I really enjoy on LinkedIn. Experiences are the currents of life. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, I don't know how that quote came about. I write a lot of poetry, and I write a lot of poetry about the Mediterranean. So I think that just came out of that. But when I look at experience design as an experience strategist in all the things that I've done up until now, my 36th year of life, I think of the experiences that I've had have just been very integral into who I have become, obviously the same as everybody else. But one thing that I have really focused on in the last, let's say, 18 months that is obviously correlated with what has been happening in the world in the last 18 months is this idea of the experiences that we go through, and they've obviously been they've shifted dramatically over that time, and we're looking at things in so many different ways. Whether no matter what you're looking at, customer service, travel, just day-to-day going to the supermarket, everything it's completely reframed now. And so when I think about the experiences that I create for others, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally, whether it's through consulting, whether it's writing, whether it's me having a relationship with someone like a good friend of mine, the experience that I'm creating for them, all of these different elements, I think about the fact that they're just strung together and we're looking at them differently, and it's important to look at them differently. And that's a big part of what I do and what I believe in and what I kind of share every single day with my work. So that's kind of where that came from.
Appreciate the fact that you said that you write a lot of poetry, because that's what it felt like to me. It felt very poetic. There's a lot of customer experience descriptions that can be transactional, logical, or something, but there was something poetic about that. And that idea of the fluid nature of experiences and how it just continues to flow. And perhaps if you stand at one place, the current will pass you by, but if you kind of flow with that current, what that might look like. That's what gets me thinking a lot about Cirque. When I think of a Cirque show, I actually think of flowing. I think of almost a current when I think of what I see on stage. So let's just jump right into that 10-year journey that you had at Cirque, which is stunning to even just say that sentence, but I can't wait to hear the rest of it. How did that 10-year journey come about?
So I always knew about Cirque du Soleil because I grew up a gymnast, not to any great standard, not to anything near Cirque du Soleil standard. Like just get that out of your head straight away. Like I was just a regular gymnast going to my local club. But so I always knew about Cirque du Soleil. When I was 18 or so, I was studying at university, and Cirque du Soleil came to my town, as they do, to Brisbane, Australia. and I worked behind the bar. I got a job like serving popcorn and making hot dogs and pouring drinks. And at the time, it's ironic because I was studying a science degree in nutrition. So it was very funny, the combination of those two worlds.
Please don't eat what I'm serving you. Please don't eat this.
Exactly. And so that's how I started. I did a great job. And then I actually traveled myself to go meet them in 2 other cities in Australia. It's something that I paid for on my own. I found my own accommodation. I booked my own flights, but I really, really loved it. And I wanted to be in that world. And so I went to 2 other cities in Australia. And then Cirque du Soleil left, as they do. They toured the entire country, Australia and New Zealand, and then off they went to Asia. And at that time, I went back to university. And then again, a couple of years later after that, same thing, Cirque du Soleil comes back to town. And the food and beverage manager was actually the manager that I had the previous time around. And so I was already at a different inn, right, to somebody else just getting a casual job. Again, started up, same thing, but they were down a supervisor, like a permanent supervisor on tour, and I naturally just slotted into taking on that extra role. I really excelled at that. And then the job opens up, they decided to open it up, I applied and I got it. And so that's how it began. And a lot of the front of house teams often start that way because they start as those local staff members and they get immersed into that world. They get quite knowledgeable, obviously, around the operations, because it's very different operations to anything else, really. And that's how it started. I actually came and left 3 different times, and I did 17 different countries. I once tried to count all the cities that I went to, and I couldn't remember.
Oh my
them
goodness.
all. I really wanted that statistic, but I gave up. But 17
That's amazing
countries
that you can't keep up with the cities. Now, you said something interesting in there, the idea of working at the front of the house, that was the beginning of your journey. And I think there's a lot of value in that because you're right there at the front lines of that customer experience. You're serving them popcorn, you're serving them hot dogs, but that is the foundation then certainly took you in a 10-year journey of an evolution. How did that, or less about how did that, but tell me more about how your 10-year journey continued as you evolved from front of house and then moved into other functions, that operational function, those experience functions. How did what you experienced at Cirque really come about?
Yeah, I credit my journey at Cirque du Soleil. I grew up professionally there because I was very young when I went on tour full time. I was 23. I was the baby. Not many people went on tour that young. And so I really grew up professionally. Obviously, I'd had jobs before. In Australia, it's very common to start working when you're around 15 or so. So, I had jobs before that. But I grew up professionally there. And what was really interesting about that role is I actually got to do every role over that entire time. I went from box office to head usher to concierge to the boutique to the bars, and where I ended up, where I liked the most was in the VIP. And I specifically liked the VIP because it's a different kind of touch point that you have with the customer when you're working in what we call the concession tent, just the main area that everybody comes in once their ticket's scanned, just like at a typical venue. You have different bars and stuff like that. I mean, you're dealing with thousands of people, right, per show. So it's not really, interactions are about efficiency. It's about efficiency, and then trying to bring this element of magic of Cirque du Soleil into it. But it's very quick interactions. VIP, on the other hand, not only does it require a different caliber of service, but it also, you have an opportunity to create more moments with the guests. And the maximum I ever had was about 250. Usually you would be around 150. And not only did I get to spend more time with them, but the coolest thing was, and anyone that is listening to this that has worked in events will know this, will have experienced this, is that I got to see their evolution throughout the entire experience. So I got to see them when they arrived. I got to see them, just before they got into the big top to watch the show. Then they came back at the intermission, and then they were, the different reactions, and they went back for the second half, and then they came back at the end. And so I got to see this experience in its entirety and actually live it for so many years, just watching guests from all over the world have different experiences and just see how that plays out, and my role in that and our role in that as a team. And so that's really that's really where that experience took off and laid the foundation for every single other thing that I did after that. Because to give you an example, I had the opportunity to go and work on a cruise ship, knew nothing about cruise ships, hadn't ever stepped foot on a cruise ship.
Right.
As a traveler, I would never go on a cruise ship. It's just not my style of travel. And I applied for a job. This is at a point when I wasn't working for Cirque du Soleil, and they kind of contacted me and said, you're overqualified for that. Have you ever thought about being an assistant cruise director on a cruise ship? And I thought to myself, I don't even know what that means. Like, I have zero
First,
idea.
tell me what it is, and then.
Yeah. So I said, and also because I had no knowledge of the cruise industry, I just had no frame of reference. But they sent me the job description, and I went, that's kind of similar. And what was really interesting is it was a new cruise ship that was in its first, I forget what the maiden voyage is called. Shakedown week, I think is what you call that first kind of week before the paying guests come. And I was part of that whole process, which to me felt like moving from one city to the next, that Cirque du Soleil. So I was very much used to this operational style of working because of Cirque. And it was so incredible to me how effortlessly I just kind of went into that new role, having no idea of that entire industry. But operationally, I'd been doing something very similar. So it was really interesting to see the correlations and how they overlap, and where your skill set, when you're working with guests and with customers, and in my case, in live events, how that translates very quickly into other different industries.
Yeah, I can see that. I actually had a guest a couple of episodes ago. It may be several episodes by the time your episode here is released, but Paul Rudder talked about, as a multi-decade experience in the cruise industry, exactly that, the operational challenges. I mean, my goodness, you're living with the guests, so there's that aspect of it. But I want to, taking what you just said there, the operational kind of triggers that. Let's talk about those VIP experiences. Cirque is all over the globe, and these, you talked about your 17 countries. And so somehow Cirque and you have to create this experience that is both repeatable, so it can actually be a business, but it's unique and oriented to the country, the community in which that show takes place. How does that come about for you? How did you help bridge that sort of operational efficiency with humanity and uniqueness specific to that community?
Yeah, so what I will say is a lot of the actual creation of the experience obviously happened long before I am ever involved and at head office. It's from concept, the creators of the shows and those kind of things. The role that we have as the front of house teams on tour is really to connect that local element, like you mentioned. And the key to this is in the staff that we hire. So every city, just like me, remember how I started at Cirque du Soleil, just like me, when I arrived there, we hire local staff to work for us. And every city, we provide about 100 to 150 jobs while we're in town, let's say. And they play a huge role in the experience that we're creating, because obviously they need to be local. And when I say local, to a certain extent, they need to be able to speak the language of the guests, because they're interacting. We were traveling all over the world, so I don't speak every language there is all over the world. So that touch point needed to be had by our staff. But so not only operationally were they doing the job, as you would say, but they were providing an insight into the guests that we didn't have. When I was in Russia, it's the first time I've been to Russia, I had no idea what to expect except stereotypes. That's how we all enter into a country, right? So you don't know, and especially from a work point of view. And so I was heavily reliant on my staff to really give me insights into what potentially would work and what wouldn't work, and what the guests would like. And in the VIP, the extra element that exists is it's catered, right? Whereas the rest of it is more like concession bars and stuff. So we're catering. And usually when I was there, it was very much local catering companies, or they would have the contract for the entire country, let's say, depending on the country. And so they were bringing their expertise into it. So it was this very beautiful mix of different groups of people that have different expertises coming together to put on the experience. And me, as the leader, I was kind of making sure all of that happened seamlessly and beautifully, and there were no customer service issues, which of course is almost impossible to get away from that.
Especially at the VIP layer. Yes.
Well, exactly. And that's how it came to be. And that's how it works so well at Cirque du Soleil, because of those different elements coming together. If I was there with a team that I always traveled with that didn't really have a touch point on that local, on the guests, I don't think it would work as well. I think it would be very different, because you already have that disconnect.
Yeah, I would expect exactly that. First, you described the language barrier, but that alone.
Yeah.
But the cultural things, right? What is Russian concession or food what might that look like? I don't know. And someone who lives there might know that. Is there a particularly unique experience that you have from one of those? Is there a story or perhaps a favorite? Either of a VIP experience or perhaps a concession experience or something like that from one of those 17 countries?
Oh my goodness. I will say, since Russia is top of mind, my staff didn't speak English. So I was running this whole operation through a translator. And I don't know if you've ever had to lead anything where you need a translator. It is such an underrated experience, in that, for example, I would be leading my team, and I'm usually quite laid back and I like to joke and, really bond with the team. But every time I would say like a joke or something, it would be me saying it, laughing at myself, these guys staring back at me with like blank faces because they literally didn't speak any English at all. And I spoke like 10 words of Russian at the time. The translator then translating it, me standing there awkwardly, and then them hearing it, and then hopefully maybe kind of laughing. Right. And so the whole experience was crazy. We were communicating with like Google Translate. We had different ideas, and they were bringing me ideas. And when the translator wasn't there, it was actually, when I think very fondly of that experience, it was challenging, of course, because you can't just go up to someone and be like, hey, can you go and do this? Like it's a whole process, right? But what I found is the more time that I spent with them, the more time that I really showed that I really cared about them, and I cared about their opinion as well. That was a huge thing. Mm-hmm. We actually created this really cool ecosystem and learned how to work amongst each other. And so, yeah, that's probably the one that comes top of mind. The Russia experience.
Fun. That is true. I've done some work where I've required a translator, not to the degree of what you're describing. And there is that awkward part. You're like, man, I just nailed it. This is a hilarious thing. Why is everybody staring at you? Of course, you know why, but there's that moment of, well, that really landed poorly. But then a few sentences later, you realize. Let's talk about that global experience. Kind of with 4 passports, dozens of countries. You've led a relatively nomadic life. What drew you to that style of living? What's that been like?
I think I was born into it, if I'm going to be honest. Both my parents, you mentioned my father's French, my mother's Kiwi, and we grew up in Australia, but they were big travelers. They actually told us, the story goes, the legend has it, that the day after they got married in New Zealand, they left on their honeymoon and they didn't come back for 2 years.
Oh,
so
gosh.
they lived on a kibbutz in Israel. They did all sorts of things. And so I think I have 2 sisters and we're all very similar. I think I'm the most nomadic, but that I think has a lot to do with Cirque du Soleil. I was constantly on the move. I didn't need a home. I didn't need even a base. I was just always moving. And it's just now a way of life. Usually after about 3 months, I start to get a bit like, I just have a feeling that I need to move, I need to go somewhere else. And so I'm trying to get out of that habit now, as, now that I've finished that part of my career. But it's definitely just something that is built within me. I think it's just always been there.
It sounds like it is definitely a part of your DNA. And for the listeners, Carolene has now landed in Cyprus and is living there. And we had a good laugh about finding apartments that had no furniture in it, so that you could put your own furniture into a place. Yes. So it actually becomes a little bit of your own. But in that sort of vein, that kind of level of travel, how did you find connectivity and build relationships as a digital nomad?
Yeah, it's very challenging. I think for me, that's just how I've always done it. So I don't feel like I've ever had those, really strong friendship groups, all the girls, we get together every year. I've never really had that, just because of my lifestyle and how I've always moved. But I I invest a lot of time and effort into people who I really want to stay connected with. And I think that comes back. And I think, it's something that you have to work at and you have to constantly keep in touch. And I mean, it's great with social media that I'm able to just like put stuff on Instagram stories and like people just see it. But I also take a lot of time to send pictures through WhatsApp to my different friends and my family, obviously, and send videos and do little videos of me, and send it to them instead of like just a text message, So I think that that's something that I will always be a reality for me. I think probably till I'm, I don't know, 85, still doing the same thing, like WhatsApping people my day to day. But it's a huge part of my life because it's always been that way. But I definitely think that it needs to be, you need to actually put some effort into that.
Carolene, I don't know that I've had a guest that needs the first class lounge more than I think you need the first class lounge. With that much travel, with that roaming the world, sometimes it's nice to just stop down and take a break. Dream travel location from your past.
I think I would say I would like to go back to New Zealand. I was born in New Zealand, but I haven't ever spent a good amount of time there. And I would like to go back and reconnect with my family there and my roots there at one point.
There's something about your birthplace, right? It will always be a part of you. I was born in Germany. Now, this was a U.S. military thing. My dad was on an Air Force base at the time, so I don't have any German family. I'm not German heritage or anything like that. But even with that, there's something about going back to your birthplace. So yes. I can see how New Zealand is that dream location from your past. And there's just that connectivity to birth. What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Morocco. I was supposed to go to Morocco in, what was it, April 2020, and we all know how how 2020 happened. So it was a trip that I was very much looking forward to. It's a culture that I'm just dying to get immersed into, and it's on the list. It's back on the list.
Boy, I bet so. And it's a pretty easy trip, I would imagine, from Cyprus over to Morocco. I got a little more challenge getting there from Texas, but I think you definitely will hit there. It's a neat. It appears to be this neat, exotic but accessible culture. The foods, the smells, the sights, all of that sound incredibly appealing. So, in that food, because travel and food go together, what is a favorite thing to eat?
I love Lebanese food. If anytime I open up Uber Eats or the equivalent, the first thing is that there's all the categories, and if there's Lebanese there, it's like I won't even look at anything else. I'm like, done. I love Lebanese food. Yeah.
Something tells me the algorithm is going to feed you that Lebanese choice every time now as it starts to learn even more about you.
I know, right?
On the flip side, and I don't know, as global as you are, this may not be an answer for you, but a thing your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid.
So I grew up in Australia, in Brisbane, where it's very hot and humid and gross for a lot of you're from Texas, actually, right? So you're in Texas. So Houston, Texas, and Brisbane, Australia have very comparable climates. We used to eat, my mum used to make us a lot of like salads, but that just had a lot of raw vegetables in it. I'll always remember all the raw cauliflower. Now I could eat that easily, and I choose it. But growing up, having that put on my plate, I was always like, oh.
I know that sensation, right? A lot of us have talked about vegetables, and a lot of guests have talked about vegetables. It's funny how much we enjoy it now as adults. And yes, I am familiar with the Houston. I only lived in Houston for a few years. I grew up in Austin and live in the North Texas region, but it is a very swampy and hot destination. Yeah. Absolutely. Now you've been quite the traveler. So what is one travel item, not including your phone, you will not leave home without?
A book for sure. I'm a huge reader. I'm a writer. And there is something very romantic about a book, I think. And so many people are trying to get me to get a Kindle because my suitcase always ends up, I just had to give away like 15 books when I was in Greece because my suitcase was overweight and I was so devastated. I have a very bad habit of buying books, and that's not a good thing when you don't have a home and you don't have anywhere to put them. But there's something very beautiful about, I think, of walking in the streets in Bordeaux in France, or being on the Greek island, as we mentioned, and just sitting down and opening up a book anywhere and just reading that. So a book would be my answer.
Carolene, those 4 passports come back to mind. Now, you told me before that you had a discovery, that you had a Canadian passport, and that discovery was kind of funny. Tell me about that Canadian passport discovery.
So I was venturing to Montreal for a project that I was working with at Cirque du Soleil. And usually I'm traveling on my French passport for the most part, just because I spend most of my time in Europe. And my application to enter the country in this one particular year was denied on the French passport. And because I have this situation, it's very rare that I have any issues, entering, because I have that flexibility and those options. And we couldn't, for the life of us, this is myself and Cirque du Soleil, figure out what the hell was going on. Like, we just couldn't work it out. It turns out that the year previous, the rules had changed in Canada, whereby if you were a citizen, you now needed a passport. It was compulsory.
Okay.
And my father, he was actually born in Algeria when it was a French colony. And when him and his family fled, they actually fled to Montreal because of a work opportunity for his father. So he grew up, he spent his youth in Montreal. And so when I was born, he just decided to get me that citizenship just for another option, right?
Just for kicks.
And I knew about it, obviously, but I never needed it. It never was a thing that we spoke about. It just existed. Yeah. So when that rule change happened, that's how it became kind of top of mind again. And then I had to go through the process to get the passport. But yeah, no, I have it.
What a crazy story to be denied, to realize, oh, wait. Oh, yeah, that's right. I am a Canadian citizen. Oops.
It's definitely something that I am incredibly grateful for my father for doing for me.
Well, so it appears it got you into the country. So thank goodness for that. What a crazy thing. Now, Carolene, we talked earlier, and I'm looking at the clock. We're kind of nearing the end of time here, but I know that I kind of want to close out with this. We talked about the how operations comes together, right? And a lot of it is using local community and understanding the local community and using that to help leverage a repeatable but unique experience. And I'm curious, let's take that Cirque experience as its whole, your nomadic life, all of that. How does that translate into what you do today? How are you helping brands find their best experience creation?
So my career as an experience strategist now, as a consultant, is something that I created as of when I finished with Cirque du Soleil in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. I created this consultancy because I felt like I had a unique skill set and experience to be offering in terms of experience design. And it took me about a year to honestly put all these pieces of the puzzle together. And now what I really focus on is I work with business owners, different leaders who maybe have an experience that they offer in their business, or they want to create one. And I help them build that out, or I help improve that. So to give you an example, if a company wants to create an annual event, an annual event for their employees, they haven't done it before. It's now all weird because there's hybrid and there's remote people and then there's office people, and they want to create something that's a little bit special, but that also really is attached to their ROI. It's attached to their company goals. It's not just a random event. It's not the Christmas party that we throw. Another example would be a client that I've just recently been working with. Is they have an online academy, and the system and processes are not built out in a way that makes that a very efficient back end of the experience.
Okay.
And that of course has ramifications on the customer experience side, right? If the back end is at that foundational piece the journey of the trainers that they bring on, the journey of the customer, what is that sequencing looking like? It's all a little bit messy right now. So I'm actually going in there to kind of fix that entire process to make sure that the end result, the experience that they are offering to the guest in the form of online courses and webinars, is really at a high level. And so I work on many different programs. I work on many different projects, but it's all around experience design. And I come from that really operational background, as we've talked about, and that global experience as well. And so I'm able to kind of bring that operational knowledge into, okay, what do we need to do on the back end of these experiences to make sure that when you actually put it on, whatever that means for you, that it's going to be incredible. So that's really what I'm focused on right now, what I absolutely love doing.
That makes a ton of sense. The idea of what's on stage, and if we just consider experience as being on stage, it doesn't have to be a literal stage, but it is on stage. It's visible to the customer. It's great if it's creatively designed to a fantastic experience. But if it can only be delivered once through a Herculean effort because the operational reality that supports it is not as strong, then it will not be a sustainable, great experience for every customer every time. And I definitely see a line between what you described as your Cirque experience to what you're doing now as an experience strategist, helping blend that creative design along with the reality of you've got to have an operational backbone and structure to be able to deliver that creative design.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you since we're talking about Cirque du Soleil, think about it this way: you have the show, which is guaranteed probably to going to be quite spectacular, right? It's almost a guarantee if you're a guest. Not many guests walk away from a show going, "That sucks." Like usually
no, that's not the brand. Like you're right.
Yeah, it's not the brand. Nicely put. Yeah, but imagine if a guest couldn't find the site because the directions were like not clear. They got to the parking, it was €20, $20. The parking attendants were super rude to them. They had to walk like a kilometer or a mile from where the parking was to the entrance. They got to the entrance. The box office didn't have their tickets. They got into the concession tent, and we can continue. We can do example. So that's, even if you have that main event really spot on, anyone that's listening to this that has any foot in the door of customer experience knows that there are so many touch points that equate to an incredible experience overall. And one of the mistakes that is often made is that only that one element is really focused on. All the eggs in that one basket, and then we'll figure the rest out. The rest will be fine, because they're going to love that main thing. And that's the perfect analogy of going to a show. And you could, any kind of live event where you have a shocking experience up to when you're actually sitting there and the show starts. Of course you're going to enjoy the show, but everything has now had an imprint, right? And affects your overall experience. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is look at that entire journey as an experience, hence why I'm an experience strategist, and look at where are all those gaps and how we need to level up different operational elements or the different processes, or does it need a little bit more creativity? Is it too efficient and robotic? Those kind of things. So
let's close out with this. How can people get in touch with you to learn more about making sure that their experience is great, that working with an experienced strategist is something they need to ensure that they've got the creative and the operational to create a great experience? How can people get in touch with you?
So my website is the best place to go. You can have a look at, learn a little bit about me, there's different resources there, have a look at the different consulting opportunities that I have. One service that I'm offering right now is an experience audit. So we take 90 minutes, we go through your entire experience, and in a 90-minute time frame, I'm able to give some strategy and give some improvements to be made. And that's a short experience that I offer. And then a longer consultancy experience, a couple projects that I'm working on. One is 3 months long, one is 6 months long. But all of that is on my website. And then I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I like to do all sorts of cool things on LinkedIn. So both of those places.
I'll make sure and get both both of those in the show notes. So you can scroll down, pull out your phone, scroll down on the app, and you can see those links there, and you can go straight to Carolene's website and to her LinkedIn profile. Caroline, thank you so much for taking the time today. I of course, I'm just fascinated with hearing the Cirque story, but the reality behind it of how it comes about and how it translates into creating a great experience. And then certainly 17 countries and the life that you've lived across all of this world. I do hope that you find some rest and stability there in Cyprus and enjoy a break from that life for a bit. But I got to imagine next time we talk, you'll be back on the road. But thank you today for talking with me on CX Passport. Really enjoyed it, Caroline. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.